Without further ado, I'm going to be talking about in the practice family law, and we're going to be covering topics relating initially to separate property. So please like, subscribe, and share, and leave a comment, or if you have any questions, I will address them either with a direct message back to you or in a subsequent video series. Anyway, thanks again, and without further ado, let's talk about separate property. So separate property is money that was acquired before marriage, or property acquired before marriage, and it can also be money or property that is inherited or gifted to a spouse during the marriage. But those characteristics regarding that separate property don't change unless you're not cautious with it or you deliberately change its character. And I'm going to explain what that means. So let's assume that husband is the beneficiary of a family farm. That family farm, he's the only living heir. Mom and dad pass away, and he outlives his siblings, and he inherits 60 acres out in Rains County, Texas, or what have you. Could be a $100,000 CD, and he's the sole beneficiary of it from a financial institution. Any number of these scenarios where a large amount of cash or property comes into the possession of a spouse. That is separate property, and it remains separate property unless a few things occur. If that farm is liquidated and turned into cash and then put in the joint checking account by husband and wife, that commingling of the proceeds from the sale of that asset, of that separate property asset, without really diligent tracing and accounting for every dollar where it was spent, you're looking at a situation where that could change and would be very difficult to reconstruct the character of that separate property. In other words, where'd the money go? How much in that joint checking account is separate property money versus community property money? And it gets to be burdensome and messy. So keeping it separate and segregated, in other words, if you're going to get that farm, leave it as a farm, or you're going to sell that farm, put those proceeds into a different account. And if you're not worried about that, you simply can change the characteristic of separate property. And I've seen spouses do this by written agreement, by putting something in the property records that it has changed and is now, so real property, real estate, family farm, a family home. You can change the characteristic of that separate property by changing the deed and making it a community asset by putting both spouses on the deed and deliberately saying in the new deed that it is a community asset. That's an easy way to change the characteristic of separate property to community property. But it can also be done simply by, or arguably be done by, commingling those funds. In other words, selling that farm, putting that money in a joint marriage checking account, joint marital checking account, and then its characteristic is either altered, or if there's going to be a claim that some of those proceeds are separate property, you're going to have to do some reconstruction of what was spent on what.